What they did to Marie Antoinette before the guillotine was shocking. There are moments in history where horror arises, not only from the final act, but from everything that precedes it, as if fate were busy slowly preparing the soul before tearing it from the body. If you are fascinated by dark stories, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. In the gray dawn of Paris, when the muffled bells announced that something terrible was about to happen, Marie Antoinette awoke not to human touch, but to the cold breath of the city itself, which seemed to enter the small cubicle where the deposed queen was kept. The air smelled of wet stone, aged sweat, and old wood, and every detail of that environment seemed to exist to remind her that the royalty she had once worn had been ripped to the bone. The revolution not only wanted her death, it wanted her dismantling. Outside, hurried footsteps crisscrossed the corridors of the conciergerie. The guards whispered amongst themselves, and even without fully understanding their words, she grasped the tone. There was expectation, impatience, a kind of ritual in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the execution that was approaching, it was something before it. Something that France demanded. She rose slowly, feeling the weight of sleepless days accumulating in her joints. Touches of light escaped through the cracks, outlining the rough contours of the wall, the wooden table, the bucket, the scattered straw that replaced any comfort. The silence that filled the room was not the silence of rest. It was the silence of waiting. The silence that precedes the breaking of a body or a name. The entire city, in feverish revolt, demanded a spectacle, and Marie Antoinette knew that her execution, in itself, was not enough. She was the symbol of a hated era, and symbols, when they fall, need to be stripped, not only of life, but of any remaining majesty. It was then that the door opened with a slow, almost ceremonial creak. 2 guards entered, accompanied by a woman with a hard face, her hands crossed, and her gaze as cold as the metal of the guillotine waiting in the Place de la Revolution. She was the tricoteuse, who oversaw the preparation of the condemned. There was something profoundly ritualistic about her presence, as if she were not merely a servant of the revolution, but an obscure priestess tasked with erasing royal memory. As she approached, Marie Antoinette noticed the object she carried, a rough cloth folded precisely, as if it had been prepared for a specific, unquestionable use. The queen's heart raced at the mere sight of that fabric, not because of the roughness of the material, but because of what it represented. The woman leaned forward and observed the former sovereign as one assesses an animal about to be slaughtered. There was no pity. There was no pleasure. Only procedure. Ritual. "It's time," she said, her voice as dry as the walls. The phrase was short, but it carried centuries of repressed hatred, as if the French people were speaking through it. The guards moved with rigidity, without excessive violence, but also without any trace of humanity. It was as if everyone there knew they were participating in something that shouldn't be named. But that was part of the machinery of the revolution. The process of emptying the individual before exposing them to the final cut. The queen walked slowly, feeling the cold floor beneath her feet, the intrusive air that enveloped her like a shroud. With each corridor she crossed, she felt the gazes of the guards who took turns, as if each of them were silently recording the fall of the one who had once been untouchable. They were not just eyes of surveillance, they were the eyes of witnesses to a ritual that needed to be fulfilled. When they reached the inner room of the conciergerie, a space that few had seen and even fewer dared to describe, Marie Antoinette smelled melted wax and damp iron. The room had no windows. It was lit only by torches, which cast long shadows on the walls and gave the room an almost subterranean appearance, like a crypt destined not for death, but for transformation. In the center of the room was a reinforced wooden chair, with leather straps on the arms and legs. It wasn't used for torture but for something equally invasive. The queen knew that this was a moment history would never record. The preparation of the condemned, the forbidden ritualized act, intended to break the spirit before breaking the neck. The rough cloth was placed on the chair, and the woman carrying it gestured for the queen to approach. Marie Antoinette felt the last crumbs of dignity clinging to her, but the world around her no longer had room for dignity. The revolution demanded nudity, exposure, humiliation. The woman touched her shoulder and guided her to the chair, with a firmness bordering on the sacred. It was as if she were leading not a queen, but an offering. The gesture carried the weight of a right that people would never witness, but necessary for the execution to have its full symbolic effect. Marie Antoinette's heart pounded, filling her ears like a war drum. She didn't know exactly what they would do to her, but she knew that whatever happened in that room would be the prelude to the final cut. The guards closed the door behind them. The sound was dry, heavy, crushing. The real terror wasn't in the guillotine. It was there, in that room, in that suffocating silence, in that secret preparation. And when the woman took her first step towards the queen, with that look of agreement, of a destiny already mapped out, Marie Antoinette understood that she had crossed the threshold. It was there that what they did to her, before the guillotine would begin, and it was there that the brutality, carefully erased from official history, would take shape. The wooden chair, with worn leather straps, awaited like a profane altar, and the tricoteuse who had accompanied her bowed slightly, not in reverence, but in confirmation that the ritual was beginning. The revolution demanded a public spectacle, but there were private procedures that history would choose to hide under layers of simplifications. Procedures that were not officially documented, but that echoed in the murmurs of the jailers, in the fragmented accounts of other prisoners, and the details preserved by those who dared to look too closely. Marie Antoinette, without knowing exactly what awaited her, felt her hands trembling, not from weakness, but from a visceral awareness that this was the moment when she would cease to be a person and become an object, a body living proof of the fall of an era. The hard-faced woman approached with a metal basin in her hands. From it rose an acidic vapor, a strong smell of vinegar, mixed with herbs that the queen recognized. Mugwort rue and something else, something that sent an ancient shiver down her spine as if they were plants. Used not to purify but to degrade, to reduce the human body to something inert. This forced bath, this ritual washing, was part of a procedure that existed on the fringes of official practices. It was believed that, before being displayed to the people, the condemned woman should be neutralized, stripped not only of clothes, but of any aura of authority, cleanliness, beauty, or dignity. The liquid was poured roughly over the queen's arms, running like small, icy blades across her skin. Marie Antoinette shuddered, not only from the cold, but from the feeling of invasion. The hair clipper rubbed forcefully, as if trying to tear away entire layers of identity. The vinegar burned, irritated, made the skin react, as if it were being erased. The smell filled the air, permeated the room, leaving everything impregnated with acidity and resentment. The guards watched with hard eyes, some with silent shame, others with the cruel firmness of those who believe they are fulfilling a sacred duty for a homeland in turmoil. The basin returned to the floor with a metallic sound that echoed like a small thunderclap in the room. Then, the woman brought a large pair of scissors, with worn but extremely sharp blades. Marie Antoinette understood. She felt her breath catch in her chest. The scissors were a symbol, an instrument of rupture, of erasure. She, who had been famous for her elaborate hairstyles, for her carefully constructed image, would now see her hair torn out, not as a hygienic preparation, but as a symbolic gesture. The cutting began without warning. The first lock of hair fell to the floor with an almost inaudible sound, but to the queen it seemed like the noise of a world breaking apart. Quick, dry, brutal cuts. The scissors spared no one's scalp, pulling violently at the roots. Each tug was like an accusation, like a silent scream from the people who held her responsible for hunger, for luxury, for inequality. The hair fell onto the stone floor in small, irregular mounds, forming a funereal carpet that accompanied the final dismantling of her public identity. Next came the guard's hands-thick rough, holding her wrists and ankles, while the tricoteuse wiped a damp cloth across her face. It wasn't a gesture of care. It was humiliation. The cloth had a rough, almost aggressive texture impregnated, with more vinegar rubbing the queen's face forcefully, as if trying to mold it into something different, as if trying to remove the last traces of a life that had ceased to exist long before that night. Marie Antoinette did not fight. She knew that fighting would only add more spectacle, more reason, more justification to the theater of humiliation. But involuntary tears welled up, not from the fervor, but from the profound realization that there, at that moment, she ceased to be seen as a human being. Then they brought what seemed like a simple apron of coarse fabric, but which symbolized something much deeper. It was the clothing of the condemned. It served neither to warm nor to adorn, it served to level, to remove distinctions, to insurrect. At the moment of execution, everyone was equal in the eyes of the people. Hansel and Gretel, peasants and queens, all there, before the blade, reduced to the same mortal denominator. The woman removed her shirt with quick, practical gestures, ignoring any trace of modesty. The cold air of the room hit Marie Antoinette's body like a slap. Her body, which already bore marks of fatigue, deprivation, and discreet mistreatment, was now exposed without ceremony, without humanity. They dressed her in the apron. It was a rogue poorly stitched, and seemed to lodge itself in her skin like a reminder that her death had already begun, even though her heart still beat. Then came the final act of the ritual. Physical examination, a procedure that, while not officially associated with humiliation, had become a dark part of revolutionary practice. The queen, once untouchable, was now examined as if she were cattle about to be slaughtered. They touched her arms, her legs, her shoulders, making sure she wasn't hiding anything not weapons, but symbols. They wanted to be sure she wouldn't carry any object to the guillotine that could inspire pity, like a medallion, a ribbon, a ring. The revolution wanted to destroy her completely, not only physically, but morally, culturally, psychologically. In the end, she was completely transformed. Barefoot, with disheveled hair, dressed in the rough apron, her skin marked by vinegar and friction. The room seemed to watch her. The guards seemed to see her not as an enemy, but as the ultimate symbol of the monarchy's downfall. The Tricotis took a step back, assessing her work with cold eyes. And then, she spoke in a low but firm voice, a voice that carried the weight of an entire era. It est ready. Marie Antoinette, however, felt exactly the opposite. For the first time since her imprisonment, she realized that nothing could have prepared her for what was to come. Not even that dark ritual, hidden from books, hidden from the squares, hidden from official history. What awaited her outside was not just the guillotine, it was all of France. And on her soul. What they did to Marie Antoinette before the guillotine was shocking, and when she left the preparation room, something within her seemed to have been irreversibly ripped away, as if each brusque gesture, each scrub of vinegar, each uneven cut in her hair had removed not only symbols of royalty, but entire layers of humanity. She walked down the narrow corridor of the conciergerie with slow steps, almost floating, as if her body no longer belonged to her, as if she were trapped on a strange threshold between life and death, between being seen and being erased. The guards accompanying her avoided looking directly at her, not out of respect, but out of discomfort, sensing that something had changed in the air around that woman. The deposed queen was no longer queen, but neither was she merely a condemned woman. The grim ritual she had suffered had created a strange space where symbol and person became confused, where human fragility became too uncomfortable a mirror for revolutionary eyes. The corridor smelled of mold and dampness, mixed with the acidic odor that still emanated from her skin. The darkened walls seemed to absorb her steps, as if trying to protect her from the judgment that awaited her outside. And yet, Marie Antoinette felt the weight of each invisible gaze, each distant murmur, each memory of the years in Versailles, where every detail was tailor-made to exalt her, and now, every detail served only to diminish her. The revolution had learned to transform people into lessons, and lessons into spectacle. Physical and symbolic humiliation was not just punishment, it was a warning. As she walked, the queen remembered the enraged crowds that stormed the palace, the lanterns raised against her windows, the voices demanding her head as if demanding divine justice. But there, on that final stretch, she realized something even crueler. The people didn't just want her dead, they wanted her to cease to exist as a historical figure, as a myth, as a memory. That's why the ritual. That's why the vinegar. That's why the brutal removal of her hair. That's why the rough apron. Each gesture had a profound emotional consequence, not just for her, but for the collective memory. If the monarchy had been built upon symbols, then the fall of the monarchy needed to undo those symbols one by one. As the guards led her to a small waiting room before the gallows exit, she could hear the sounds of the crowds outside. Shouts, agitated conversations, the creaking of the wooden structures of the guillotine being adjusted, the anxious chanting of street vendors profiting from the death of others. The air vibrated with morbid excitement, but among the sounds there was something more. The echo of her own accelerated breathing, the almost imperceptible tremor of her fingers, the erratic beating of a heart that knew that no ritual, however brutal or meticulous, could truly prepare her for the guillotine. The room was small, dimly lit, with a single chair against the wall. She didn't dare sit down. The short apron left her too vulnerable, too exposed, as if the simple act of bending her knees could cause the weight of the world to collapse upon her. And there, alone for a few moments, she began to feel the invisible consequences of the ritual. Vinegar burned her skin. The absence of hair weighed like a torn ghost. Her body gasped as if searching for a breath that had belonged to another life. But the most brutal thing was internal, the feeling that she had been emptied of human meaning. It was as if the revolution, in preparing her for death, had prepared her memory for oblivion. When the door opened again, and the guards called her by name, not by title, not by honor, something inside her silently closed. She walked towards the exit as if crossing a narrow tunnel between worlds. The cold glare of the Parisian morning hit her eyes, forcing them to squint. The square was crowded, a pulsating mass of faces eager to witness a final chapter they believed to be liberation. But upon seeing the figure emerging from the conciergerie, something changed in the expressions of many. She was no longer the haughty queen of caricatures, nor the adorned woman representing excessive luxury. She was small, thin, simply dressed, almost unrecognizable. The ritual had served its purpose. Marie Antoinette did not look like a queen being led to her death, but a soul already dead being led to the end of her body. Even so, there was dignity in her posture. Not the imposing dignity of Versailles, but the silent dignity of someone who understood, at the last moment, that history would shape her more than the men present. She climbed into the cart that would take her to the scaffold amidst boos and confused applause. The journey was long, and each street seemed laden with memories that no longer belonged to her. Destroyed shops, scribbled walls, citizens who watched her with hatred, or with a disguised sadness they would never admit to feeling. But there were also those who looked at her with curiosity, not because of death itself, but because of the visible transformation. How could a woman, once so distant from ordinary mortals, now seem so human? This was the profound and unexpected impact of the ritual. The humiliation was intended to reduce, but ended up revealing something more dangerous. Universal vulnerability. The idea that, in the end, queens and commoners were equally fragile in the face of death. When the cart arrived at the Place de la Révolution, the crowd parted like a restless sea. The guillotine gleamed in the pale light, its blades polished, ready, almost silent, as if respecting the moment. Before being positioned on the scaffold, Marie Antoinette felt the guard's hands on her arms again, guiding her, not violently, but with haste. The ritual had ended hours before, but its consequences echoed in that instant. She was a body to be displayed, but also a symbol to be erased. Before ascending the scaffold, she glanced briefly around. The city seemed to breathe hatred and hunger, but also fear and despair. And, in that final look, something within her rose again. Not the queen, not the noble woman, but the woman who understood that history would devour her, but also make her eternal. She climbed the steps, feeling the cold wood beneath her feet. Above her, the sky was gray-heavy, thick, as if even it awaited the outcome. She lay down beneath the blade, knowing that all of this, the cut, the fall, the blood would last seconds, but the ritual before the end, that would last for centuries, as an invisible scar on the world's memory. The blade fell. The crowd roared. The revolution advanced, and the silence that followed did not erase her story, it only transformed it. because the woman they humiliated before death became, unintentionally, the cruelest and most human reflection of her time. And that is why, even when the world tries to forget, her memory remains, traversing eras like a whisper that refuses to be silenced.